Nietzsche was the first person in history to provide an accurate description of the regulating mechanisms of morality that are experienced in human consciousness. He basically said that human consciousness regulates our actions through morality via the feeling experience of power, owing a debt, shame, and guilt. He believed that feeling regulates man's moral worth, involving shame and guilt of oneself or others for perceived bad things, or a feeling of aiming upwards towards power, dog eats dog, and not caring, thereby preventing a feeling of shame and guilt. He also noted a feeling of owing a debt or feeling that others owe a debt if wrong is done. For Nietzsche, however, morality was subjective, based on cultural rules and societal conditions. So, feeling reactions to moral consequences are due to cultural rules or societal regulations being enforced. So, people feel shame and guilt as a consequence of disobeying societal conformities. Additionally, for Nietzsche, guilt and shame feelings in reaction to moral error can be flipped to remove the shame and guilt or be changed to something worthy of self-aggrandizement and power. As for Nietzsche, morality was subjective. He thought anybody can make his own pursuit of values, his own morality. Therefore, one can overcome the feeling of wrongdoing or sin through a feeling of power and pursuit of one's own unique morality and values. He landed on the extreme prominence of shaming and guilting in his late 19th century European society as being a largely cultural consequence of the orthodoxy of Judeo-Christian teaching, with so many sins being taught, so much emphasis on humility, reducing one's power, and lowering one's self-worth. Nietzsche viewed this as Judeo-Christian culture trying to make slaves out of humanity for their own power play. That is, being modest, humble, calling one's sins as sins, guilting oneself for wrongdoing, and shaming others, all there to create obedient slaves. He called it a slave morality. And the real flip comes with the realization that Judeo-Christian culture became in effect a power hierarchy of the holiest of humility, worthlessness, and self-sacrifice. What is also essential to following how Nietzsche reached his views was not only his ideas on feeling states and consciousness, but how important the unconscious was in dictating our actions and thoughts. What does man actually know about himself? Is he, indeed, ever able to perceive himself completely, as if laid out in a lighted display case? Does nature not conceal most things from him, even concerning his own body, in order to confine and lock him within a proud, deceptive consciousness? A thought comes when it wishes, not when I wish. Because Nietzsche brought the idea that people knew very little about themselves, their motives, their reasoning, he seriously questioned the Judeo-Christian culture at his time, their real moral effects, their motives, and their philosophy. As mentioned, Judeo-Christian teaching at the time for Nietzsche was there to shame and guilt people for wrongs they had done, with the goal of improving mankind's morality. Only they were unaware that just because you make a rule book of morality against the perceived bad does not mean that you entirely remove all the bad in the world. Rather, you become unconscious of the bad you do, and you create a power hierarchy of sinners and non-sinners. And since nobody can avoid all sin, many people are lamed. They live with a shame and guilt that eats away at them unfairly. Not all morality is black and white either. Living by a rule book, you then become unconscious of the good that comes out of things the law book tells you not to do. This extreme focus on preventing sin leads to extreme attempts to avoid guilt and shame in Judeo-Christian religion, and a good feeling state for calling out other people's sins so that oneself feels superior and others feel guilt or inferiority for any perceived sin. It devolved from pursuing the moral goodness of mankind into a power game of who are the sinners. Those who sin less and call others out for sins feel good and have the power. Now, that is Nietzsche's view, of course, and he got it, in my opinion, reasonably correct, but a few important caveats that will be discussed further, probably in a second video. Now, we come to Nietzsche's most important discovery, which nobody talks about or even realizes. I'm not sure if Nietzsche even entirely realized it, so let me try and summarize it for you. When one does not experience shame and guilt for their actions, then one feels that they can keep on doing what they are doing. For as long as they don't feel guilt or shame, as long as their conscious feeling allows it, that it's good, it's virtuous, that it is in the name of God and the good, and so on, then anything can be done. So, from a moral standpoint, people can do essentially anything, no matter how evil it is, as long as their conscious feeling state allows it. Most of the evil that you see in the world is therefore done with good intentions, with good intent behind it, with a good conscience. And that, for me, is Nietzsche's most important discovery on morality. However, you would be right to suggest, as I have discussed before, Nietzsche did not believe in morality in any innate ideas of good and evil, beyond good and evil. It was all cultural conformity to him, societal pressure, and so on. Morality is subjective. It's just that we have these conscious feelings regulating us as dictated by society and our culture. So for him, he really contributes a great deal in influencing postmodern philosophy. That is the view that everything is made up in our heads and every human can subjectively live his own narrative, his own rules. And this avoidance of good and bad, this complete subjectiveness of good and bad, was his biggest mistake. Carl Jung went on to ascribe this mistake as a turning point into the outbreak of Nietzsche's schizophrenic insanity. Nietzsche's reliance on social construction also led him towards his philosophy of the Übermensch, the man who creates his own moral rules, laws, and norms in contrast to the made-up conformities of society. It is no surprise, then, that the Nazis were influenced by Nietzsche to live shamelessly and guilt-free in their own pursuit of power and moral values in the most extreme ways. Nonetheless, whether you agree with all the views he reached, you can see Nietzsche's path to realization to understand where human consciousness is regulated by these mechanisms of power, guilt, and shame in the moral landscape, and as a consequence of his thought, how we now in modern day can understand why evil is committed, and unfortunately, the conclusion you must reach is that evil is almost always done with good intentions, and that the most evil things are done with good intentions, because if one felt guilt and shame, one would stop doing what they were doing. So, if you have any sense when you think you are doing good, you should also question what the costs of my actions are. But then you run into a problem. One cannot easily realize the cost of their actions, and the problem of, if I question my good, I may feel guilt and shame unnecessarily. So, there are problems here that need answering, and hopefully I can get around to another video. Please like, comment, subscribe, and join the Patreon for exclusive content. Anybody who joins the Patreon or donates, you also have a free dream analysis from me. Thank you.